Northwest City Politics in the Know with Juanita. We're glad that you're joining us again. It's been a little while in between programs, but we're getting back on a regular basis, so we're glad you're joining us. We're glad for people like you that are interested in what's happening in your cities. If you haven't watched us before, each week we'll have somebody on from one of the 9 cities in CCX's viewing area to update us on what's happening in that city and what's going to be happening in the future. And then from time to time, we bring in other people that interact with all of our cities as a whole, which we're doing tonight. We're very happy to have Representative Mike Freiberg with us from District 45B. So it's been a little while since we've had you on. So we're glad to have you back, and it's been a different year in many senses. The legislature being one of the many ones, and we'll look and see what's happened there and what's going to come up in the future of the 2020 legislative session. And I asked you to think about something a little bit. What's the best way for the people in District 45B to get in touch with you if they've got concerns or ideas or questions?
I would suggest email first. First of all, it's great to be back. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. But to answer your question, I would suggest probably email is the best way to get a hold of me, especially since the pandemic hit. I get voice messages forwarded to me and so forth, but just the quickest way I would say is probably email. My email is rep.mike.freiberg@house.mn. So like mail, letters through the mail take a while to get to me now. So I would suggest email. I try to respond. I get emails from all over the state, but if I know they're a constituent, if they include their address too, then I'll know they're a constituent.
Important. And, for people let you know that they're from your district.
Mm-hmm.
And it is important for people to keep in touch with you on the different issues so you know what they think.
Absolutely.
So we're always glad to talk about that. Then a little bit about the way the pandemic affected the House and the Senate, and are there the changes in the process of having hearings on up-and-coming legislation? Are there any changes you're looking at? You've done an experimental way. Are there changes coming ahead yet in how the process of doing it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I described a bit just some of the changes in the floor sessions and the committee hearings. I mean, I don't know if I'd describe them as experimental. At least as long as the pandemic's in place and we still have this need to social distance, I imagine we'll keep doing it this way. It'll be, I think the 2021, assuming we're still in a pandemic at the beginning of 2021, and at this point it certainly looks like we will be. So I imagine we'll continue to have remote committee hearings for the foreseeable future. And I imagine in a budget setting year, that could be a real drain. Those could be challenges. There could be challenges. I mean, it is possible maybe we'll be able to start having some committee hearings in some of the bigger committee rooms where there is a possibility to
spread people
to social distance and so forth. I mean, it's important that we make sure that committee hearings are a public and transparent process. So, if we do something like that, I'm sure we'll need to, figure out a way to. It'll need to at least be broadcast on the House Information Services website and so forth, because I don't know if it'll be possible to have members of the public come in or not in person. I imagine we'll have to, if we are able to meet in person committees, we'll still need to be able to have people have the ability to testify remotely, even if the legislators are there in person. So there'll probably be more changes, especially as we get into the budget setting session next year, I would imagine.
Yeah, because I was thinking about how people's interaction with their legislators and how your interaction with the residents got the changes you've had to make because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, campaigning, in a pandemic is I talked already about how email is probably the best way to get a hold of me now in my official capacity, but then as a candidate, normally I would be out door knocking. Because that's a really good way, I think, to meet people, find out what issues are important to them. But this year, I haven't been doing that. I've been lit dropping, I've been phone calling, I've been
Right.
texting. I've had to figure out how to do kind of texting as a campaign strategy. I mean,
Yeah, everybody's trying to find different ways of reaching out to people.
yeah. We had a candidate parade. And in Crystal, we've had meet and greets out in the park that are socially distant. So I mean, there's just a lot of different campaigning techniques this year that we've had to try. Also,
And then see what works the best, right?
yeah, exactly.
Now, another issue that's an important one is climate change. And what kind of issues has the state legislature dealt with in regards to that issue?
Sure. Well, you may remember that there was a youth climate strike in 2019. Kind of coming out of that, in the House, we formed actually, I think there are a couple senators involved now too, the Climate Action Caucus. And I'm a member of that group. I mean, certainly the federal government hasn't, this is a serious crisis that we need to address. I mean, and the federal government hasn't been pulling its weight on it. So I think there are things we can and should and need to do actually at the state level to help address the climate crisis. It touches every sector of our government, so agriculture, energy production, transportation, housing, public health. So we need to take climate change seriously. I do still hear from some of my colleagues in the legislature who don't believe in climate change.
Yeah.
They don't believe it's man-made. They think it's a hoax. That's not like a straw person argument. I've actually heard that stated on the House floor. So the kind of the main focus of our climate action plan is setting a goal for 100% clean energy by 2050. And then there were a bunch of specific measures within that. And actually, since I chair the committee that has jurisdiction over state agency policy, generally I introduced a couple bills in that area as well. So I had one bill to create a revolving loan fund just to help state agencies increase their sustainability. And then also set a greenhouse gas reduction goal for Minnesota government, basically cutting our emissions in half by 2030. I think it's really important that we lead by example. So climate is one issue. We were in the process of kind of putting our climate package together when the pandemic hit, and it's one of those issues that kind of we weren't able to take as much action on during the 2020 session as we would have liked. So I'm hopeful that that is something that we can be very focused on in the 2021 session.
Right, definitely. And what kind of reaction do you get from residents in your district about climate change?
I mean, I think most residents that I speak to and that I hear from, by email or other means, agree that it's just a critical problem that the state needs to tackle. I'm hopeful that there might be the federal government, let's just say after this November, the federal government might be a little more responsive to addressing the climate crisis. But even still, even if that does happen, I'm hopeful. I think we need to do it at the state level as well. And I think generally the residents of the district I represent are in agreement with that.
Yeah, because there's been more growing concern about it over time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, young people in particular, I think, realize what a critical problem it is. I remember I had a high school student kind of shadowing me one day at the legislature. I think this was in 2019. And I mentioned that one of my colleagues was talking about how climate change is a hoax, and she happened to be there when he said that, and I just remember her eyes getting really wide, like she couldn't believe somebody would actually say something like that, much less an elected official setting the policy of state government. So, I think if my generation and older generations doesn't tackle this problem, I think the younger generations are going to come to the rescue on this issue because they see what a problem it is and they're not going to keep waiting.
Yeah, you see more concern at that age level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any specific bills that are being worked on now between sessions? Or there's too many other things to deal with, so it hasn't taken any specific form yet?
Yeah, no, I mean, I mentioned the goal for clean energy by 2050. I think that's something that'll probably come back next year. Certainly I intend to keep working on some of the state efficiency measures that I discussed. I mean, right now I think a lot of legislative work is kind of on pause just because
yeah.
of the campaign and the pandemic and so forth. So I think people at this point it's getting pretty late, and people kind of want to know who is going to be in charge of both chambers of the legislature
When
next
that
year.
gets through, then it'll pick up more.
Yeah, then we'll have a sense for what's possible.
Right.
I think. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's important. Now, another big issue is the bonding bill. Maybe you can talk about the bonding process that's done by the state legislature.
Well, sure. I think we talked earlier about how it's traditionally, bonding is something that's traditionally addressed during the even year of the legislature.
Right.
And it requires a supermajority vote. So this is a bill to fund infrastructure projects, so buildings, bridges, roads, wastewater treatment facilities, a lot of higher education assets are funded through a bonding bill, through bonding process as well. So, the bonding committee every year goes on these trips during the summer and visits every part of the state to look at different projects.
Oh, right.
It's a serious commitment to be on the bonding committee.
But they are taking an actual look at what people are bringing forward, right?
Yeah, no, they are. I have not been on the bonding committee myself. I was on the legacy committee for a few years, and it's sort of a similar process, not quite as big of a scale, but one year we did take a trip through northern Minnesota just to look at some of the projects that were being funded under that one. But the bonding bill, so then once they get a sense, from visiting the state of where there are particular needs, then they'll put together a package, and it's got to be geographically balanced. It's got to be balanced well by districts represented by both people, because certainly right now for a bonding bill to pass, it needs to have support from both parties.
Right.
And there were actually some projects in the bill that we were discussing this year that would benefit our area too. I know the Crystal Police Department had some funds in the one that passed the House. There's an underpass in Golden Valley by the Purpose Center under Highway 55, because there's some serious safety concerns at the Douglas Drive and Highway 55 intersection. So we were able to get those included in the bonding bill that was voted on in the House and had majority support, but it didn't have supermajority support, unfortunately.
Well, now, will that same bonding bill carry forward, or do you have to start all over again when a new session starts?
I imagine a lot of the same projects will still be under consideration. I mean, the need is only going to keep increasing in the state. So it might be a starting point, but I'm sure there will be additional needs. Maybe some issues will have just been addressed by a local government or something in the interim and won't be a need anymore, and then maybe I'm sure there'll be some new needs around the state as well. So I'm sure a lot of them will still be under discussion, but I don't know the exact number or anything.
And what do you think are the issues that prevented the bill from coming to fruition? Is it tied up in a different area with the pandemic, or is it the bonding process itself?
Yeah, no, actually it was sort of tied to the pandemic. I think the House minority leader kind of backed himself into a corner and said, unless the governor ends his emergency authority, the House Republican caucus is not going to provide any votes for a bonding bill. And we are still in an emergency, and the governor is not and should not, tie public health policy to economic development policy. Basically, they're unrelated. At last I heard, that's still the position of the House GOP, and they voted kind of in lockstep with him. They didn't provide a single vote for it. So, from what I understand, there are negotiations happening. It's possible they might back off of that position, but that was kind of certainly one of the major hang-ups, I think.
Maybe as that gradually resolves itself, we hope. The sooner the better, but it doesn't sound like it's going to happen very soon.
Yeah.
So now, how voting is accomplished, whether it's by mail, in person, or whatever, has become an issue on a federal level and definitely in many states. What are the issues that are being brought up on both sides in regards to the national popular vote to elect a president? Because that's one of the ways that's being promoted.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's been a topic of discussion, more so in the House. It's certainly something that I've been supportive of. So, I mean, I think probably most of your listeners know how the Electoral College works. The default rule is that a state that, whichever candidate for president a state votes for, that state then pledges all of its presidential electors towards the winner in that state. But there's nothing that actually says states have to do it that way. So some states I know will allocate their votes by congressional district. So the winner for president in a specific congressional district will then get the electoral vote representing that congressional district. But another proposal that's been floated and passed in several states is that states can allocate their electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote. So we've, the 2000 election, the 2016 election, in both cases, the winner of the popular vote didn't actually become president. So if enough states, I think there's 270 votes as a majority in the Electoral College. If enough states representing 270 electoral votes pass a law that says we're going to allocate our electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote, then essentially that will be a way that kind of to get around the Electoral College, which seems like an outdated concept to me, and I think to a lot of people. Something from the past
that served a purpose, but maybe doesn't anymore.
Yeah, and I think it's resulted just in a few. I mean, not even a few states. Even within those states, a few counties just becoming the entire focus of the presidential election. At the expense of other states that are just kind of written off by presidential candidates. So to me, it seems like a good way to just. It seems like the more democratic option, honestly, that the winner of the popular vote should become the president. And it used to be that United States senators were elected by the state legislature until an amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed in the early 20th century. And that provided for direct election of U.S. senators. And, it doesn't seem like the Republic collapsed when that was passed. And I think it would be fine if the National Popular Vote Compact was passed as well in multiple states.
And in order to change the electoral college process is much more lengthy process than the one that you described as a possible way around it.
Correct.
That you have to go make an actual change in the Constitution.
Yeah, and we actually passed the National Popular Vote provision through the House State Government Finance package that passed in early 2019, but that was one of the provisions that the State Senate did not agree to, so we weren't able to prevail on that ultimately.
And then there's several cities in Minnesota have moved to ranked choice voting. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Ranked choice voting is a way to vote where you actually mark your preferences. So it's not just like you can only vote for 1 out of 5 candidates, but you can actually rank your first choice, your second choice, third choice, fourth choice, and fifth choice, or depending on how the system is designed. And then usually what happens is, if no candidate gets a majority of first place votes, the candidate with the least amount of them is dropped off, and then the people who voted for that candidate first get to have their second choice counted. And right now it's legal for charter cities in Minnesota to adopt ranked choice voting, and many have done so. So Minneapolis and St. Paul have it in place. I think Duluth does as well. Generally speaking, like your larger regional centers are charter cities, and some other random cities like Robbinsdale is a charter city that I represent. But then other cities are what's called statutory cities, where it's more limited what they can do. A lot of what they can do is just spelled out in state statutes. So Golden Valley and New Hope are examples of statutory cities. So, there's been a bill around the legislature for the last several years to allow all cities in Minnesota to adopt a system of ranked choice voting, and I've been supportive of that as well, and we passed that in this House State Government finance bill as well, and unfortunately that's another provision the Senate didn't agree to. But
Right.
I think we've had several years of experience now in Minneapolis with ranked choice voting, and I think it works well. People like it, and I think it actually improves the tone of a campaign too.
Right.
So, because I mean, if you want the second choice, if you want to be the second choice of another candidate's, first choice voters,
Right.
chances are you'll be a lot nicer to that candidate and run a more positive issue-focused campaign. And it seems like that's actually happened, I think, in
And they
Minneapolis.
haven't had difficulties with it, because first the media seemed to be talking about how difficult that was going to be for people to understand, but it seems like it hasn't been a real problem.
Yeah, I haven't heard of much
Yeah.
in the way of problems related.
Now, the Minnesota Senate has, at this point, removed 2 of the commissioners that Governor Walz had brought forward, and I thought maybe you could talk about what's happening there, or why, and what you think about it.
Yeah, I don't think it's good, especially during a pandemic and an emergency situation. The Minnesota Senate does have the authority to approve the governor's cabinet
Right.
officials and administration officials, commissioners, and so forth. So right now, our governor, Governor Walz, is a Democrat, and the state Senate is controlled by Republicans. And I mean, kind of the way it's worked the last several sessions, when the governors of one party and the senates of another party, they just haven't voted on most of the commissioners,
Right.
unless there's a serious, issue or
reason
problem, or some sort of problem with that commissioner. So it seems like the Governor Walz's commissioner of labor and then his commissioner of commerce were
Right.
removed during the last 2 special sessions, and it was kind of, my sense was it was kind of an ambush. I remember when the first one was removed, the House Minority Leader tweeted something like, "Oh, it looks like we're watching a political execution right now," which says to me this was more just a form of political retribution
Right.
than a genuine concern about the performance of the commissioner. And I think that's a real problem, and I think it can lead to a lot of instability in state government and in these agencies. I mean, right now the Commerce Department, the Labor Department are, they're doing a lot of really important work, whether it's
definitely.
processing unemployment claims and so forth. So just removing the commissioners, I think, is the wrong thing to do right now. It's certainly within the authority of the Senate under
Right.
Minnesota law, but it seems kind of like a political cheap
Right.
shot to me.
I can't remember that being done in the past that I lived through. I can't remember. That might have.
Yeah, I mean, I know under Governor Pawlenty, I think it happened once or twice. I think his transportation commissioner was removed shortly after the bridge fell.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
So I think he might have had an education commissioner removed as well. So I mean, it has happened on both sides, but at least in those situations, I didn't get the sense it was kind of like an ambush type setup. Like it was in this case. I mean, the first time it happened this year, it was, there was no warning really, and it just kind of seemed to come out of nowhere.
It was a big surprise. Yeah. And it definitely will affect the efficiency of both those departments.
Yes, no, absolutely.
And then we've got a few minutes left. I thought we could talk briefly about what's happening in regards to legalizing marijuana in Minnesota. Sometimes that gets to be a bigger issue, and then sometimes not as much. So,
sure. Yeah. No, that's another issue I think where the pandemic kind of stalled momentum on it. I mean, I don't think it would have been signed into law this year, just because the Senate was pretty categorically opposed. They actually voted down. Like, I was chief author of one of the. There were a few different legalization bills out there, and I was chief author of one of them, House File 420, and the Senate actually voted down in committee the Senate companion to that bill, and there were a few other versions in there as well. during the break between the 2019 and 2020 session, I know the House Majority Leader, Representative Winkler, hosted a series of meetings around the state, and I attended a couple of them just on cannabis legalization and hearing
Right.
from people, hearing their thoughts about it. And he took a lot of that together and put together his own bill, which ultimately got introduced right near the end of session. But I mean, by that point, it was, we were well into the pandemic.
Right.
So, we were probably going to we probably would have had a committee hearing on it if the pandemic hadn't struck. But,
sure.
But I don't know that we would have, like I said, I don't think it would have become law just because the Senate was very opposed. But I think there would have been more discussion about it. At least we could have gotten some public input and perhaps amended the bill and to address concerns of different entities. I think it probably and it's an issue that continues to have a lot of people are interested in it. Like I work in public health when I'm not
Right.
at the legislature, so it's kind of a weird issue for me to be working on. But I've sort of come to the conclusion that the momentum is there for legalization. It's
I
been
think
happening in so
it's
many other
growing,
states.
right.
Yeah, so I mean, at least I feel like my thinking is if I'm involved in it, if I have a seat at the table, I can influence the way it looks and hopefully work on a bill that that will have public health protections in place that will avoid some of the problems we've seen with tobacco products or
right.
alcohol, just where it's been marketed and targeted to kids.
Definitely.
And so forth. So the bill I introduced had a lot of public health protections in place, and actually there were people who supported legalization who felt like it was too restrictive. They wanted a more wide open one. And I also feel like the prohibition on cannabis has led to disparities in the criminal justice system
Right.
and so forth too. And so my bill had some provisions to address that. It's something that I think will come back in the 2021 session. We have two major parties in Minnesota
Right.
that support marijuana legalization, so it's clearly an issue that's not going away anytime soon. And I think depending on the outcome of the election, we could end up with a majority in both chambers that supports it,
yeah.
and it could end up happening in the 2021 session.
Right.
So.
Yeah, because it is an issue where there's been changing ideas on it over a period of several years.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to update our audience out there on some of the things and what's happening in the legislature, because it's been definitely different, right? A new change for a new time. So we would thank you very much for being with us and helping our audience to learn more about what's going on.
Yeah, thank you.
And if they have any questions and you're in Representative Freiberg's district, be sure to contact him with either through email, because that's the easiest, or phone. And we'll look for you to join us again next week. Bye.